Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Today we're going to go back to a topic that I like to cover, and I've had a few great guests like Tammy Guler-Loeb and like John Nerrill talking about careers and your career journey. And even though we're not going to explicitly talk only about careers, I just wanted to kind of get into it a little bit because, look, your career is different than mine. Your journey's different than mine. And, it's different from pretty much everybody else. But I think we can all agree that careers have phases. There's highs and lows. There's trajectories and so on. But what's missing for most of us is that we don't treat our career as a holistic thing in and of itself. We don't look at our career as something we need to focus on as much. And we don't necessarily know how to develop the skills we need to excel managing our career. And that's why I've got one of the best guests I could possibly ask for today, because that's what he is here to change. He is quite the Renaissance man. He's got 3 degrees from MIT. He's an accomplished startup CTO with mad tech skills, of course. He's got expertise in finance, corporate culture, and leadership. He's chased down cyber criminals and terrorists on the dark web. And he teaches at MIT's undergraduate practice opportunities program, which he helped to start. He also happens to be a collector of cufflinks, which I do want to hear about, by the way. And he is an award-winning ballroom dancer. I am privileged, indeed, and excited to welcome to the show the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You, my friend, Mark Herschberg. Mark, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I am very excited to be here and to chat with you and share some ideas with your audience.
I love it. And we talked about, like, obviously in the intro, I built you up a little bit, but it's not even a build up. This is what you've done. These are facts. I didn't manufacture anything there. But the reason that you're here today has almost nothing to do with your resume. It's because my friend Michael Glazer interviewed you for the Humans at Work podcast, his very fine show. You've also been on Tammy Guler-Loeb's show, and she's another previous guest of mine and a good friend. And, it's something that I think we'll get into a little bit. But, when your network, the people that you trust the most, introduce you to somebody and say, this is somebody you need to talk to, you never even have to look at the resume because the trust is already there, right? I mean, it's already there. And that is a kind of a little segue into your book a little bit. And I wanted to give you time to talk about yourself and your journey first. But before we do that, one of the things that I picked up about, like, out of your book straight away, and it's fantastic, we'll talk about how it's set up, is you really light up the whole networking concept a lot. And it's chapter 8 about networking as part of, as a tool for your career. And you dig deep into the issue of trust. And just before we got on our call, today, or on the podcast today, as I was thinking about that, about trust and about how that exact process that you laid out, connections that matter, people in your network who bring value, that just stood out for me because that's why we're here today. And I just wanted to kind of lead with that. And, and thank you again for being part of my friend's network. And now you're a part of mine.
Yeah, thank you. And this is something that I think most people get wrong, especially today, because today we have these metrics. How many followers do you have? How many friends on Facebook? How many connections on LinkedIn? And so many people will say, well, I'm going to connect with everyone. Well, you can do that. You can add 10,000 people to you on LinkedIn, but how well do you know them? My rule is everyone I am connected to on LinkedIn, they are someone I know and can vouch for in some way. Now, some people I've known for 20 years, I could spend 2 hours talking about how great they are. Other people, maybe I only just got to know them, but I say, oh, yeah, he's a really nice guy, or I was on his show and we had some good conversations. So it might be a different level, but there's some level of trust, some type of endorsement that comes from your network. But I meet these people, just add everyone they can to their network. And when you ask for an introduction, oh, can you introduce me to her? Well, I don't actually know her. It just looks like I know her because we're connected, but I can't use that connection in any way. I can't do an introduction. I can't reach out. She really is a stranger. Well, then you're not really in the same network as that person. You just add someone on LinkedIn.
Yeah, the trust isn't there. The social capital that is the currency of your network is not flowing quite as freely as you think it should be flowing between and among your connections. It's a crime that I am indeed guilty of as well, actually. I've gone through my periods of time, and my listeners will know that there's times where I have just gone hog wild on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'll connect with everybody because, hey, right now I'm in a business building mode, or I'm in a networking mode, or whatever the mode is. And I've been on LinkedIn for 20 years. It comes and goes in my, kind of priority list as something I need to be doing. Overall, every time I sit back and kind of reflect, after I've gone through a period of time where I add a lot of people, I always feel like hungover. I feel like I've just ingested too much. And it's not that any of them are bad people, but how can I do them the justice of following up with them and really treating them really well as part of my network? Because when you bring somebody into your network, you owe them something, I think. Maybe I'm crazy, but
no, I think we're, at the very least, we owe them support. We've said, I am investing in our relationship. I'm investing in you. I'm hoping you're going to invest in me. And it's a commitment we've made to each other. My philosophy, I think of my network like my home. I don't just let anyone come into my home. Now, I'm open to meeting people. I used to host a lot of parties before COVID took over, and hopefully I will again. So there's a whole bunch of people who I've known and will invite. Now, they're welcome to bring other people. I don't just let anyone off the street come in. If someone vouches for you, if my friend Sarah says, I'm bringing in Joe, he's a friend of mine. Okay, Joe, you're very welcome. In fact, even if Sarah can't make it, she sometimes says, hey, I'm saying this guy, Joe, I think you guys should meet. Okay, come on in. Joe, you have temporary access. You have Sarah's giving you, temporary access. Well, if I get to know Joe and I like Joe, great. Joe, you're now entered into my home. You can now come in. And that's how I think of my network. I'll meet lots of people, and then a certain amount gain that access. Welcome to the network, as opposed to outside, I can still go and talk to you. Because we can have relationships or talk to people outside of our network, but people in our network have that special privilege, that trust that you were talking about.
Yeah. A lot of folks nowadays who have come up in this time of digital networking, and we'll talk about that too, because there's a part of your book that you called out, and I specifically highlighted it, which is that you're a fan of business cards. Me too. There's something really important about the face-to-face. Some people call it belly to belly. The handshake, or I was in Japan for a long time, so the bow, something where you're face to face and you're doing some kind of exchange of goods and services. In this case, it's a business card, where there's a tangible reminder that you've met. But anyway, regardless of all that stuff, I think a lot of folks today feel like they're entitled to be in your network because, that's how you stay in touch, right? You're on LinkedIn, right? Let's just connect there. It's a little, and I'm guilty of that sometimes too, but whether that's laziness because you don't carry a card around with you, or just because you're having a conversation, or is it a feeling of entitlement? I don't know. Jury's still out. Just something that I'm interested in kind of thinking about. So overall, you really do need to keep an eye on the quality of your network, and how you judge that. You have to have standards, which I've had from time to time. Yeah. But anyway, man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to really divert that far into networking, because it does come further in the book. That's the way that you were introduced to me. And I wanted to kind of get to how you actually got on the show. And that's pretty much how. So forgive me for indulging, or thank you for indulging me on that point. Before I even gave you the platform to say, hey, man, tell us how you got from, MIT, 3 degrees, technical guy, through to a business strategist, a startup expert, and then ultimately to this whole idea of being a career sage, if you will, like somebody who's helping people from age 20 to 50, 60. I don't know. I think this book applies across your entire career. How'd that evolution happen?
Sure. And I don't think it was bad that we started with networking, because one of the ways the book is written is that you can open it up and say, first thing I'm going to do is read chapter 8. And then I'm going to jump to chapter 3 and maybe chapter 9. And you don't have to read it in order. It's a toolkit. You want to start with a hammer? Great. Start with a wrench, whatever works for you. But to your question, right, how did I wind up there? Because that's not a standard path for a guy with a bunch of quant degrees from MIT. When I graduated in the 90s, I started as a software developer during the dot-com era. And I realized early on I wanted to become a CTO, a chief technology officer. So I began to look, okay, what does a CTO do? I should understand this, and got it. And this sounds interesting. Now, what are the skills that I need to be a CTO? It wasn't just about being the best engineer. It wasn't about coming up with the best design, solving the problems fastest. There were all these other skills: leadership, communicating, having a strong network, negotiating, team building, hiring. No one ever taught me this stuff. That wasn't in my undergraduate program or almost anyone's. So I had to develop these skills in myself. And as I was doing that, I began to realize these skills are not just for executives. They are for senior leaders, mid-level people, even the most junior people. They're for solopreneurs and founders and everyone. So I began to train up my team. There weren't a lot of resources for it. There weren't as many business books. There weren't great podcasts like this one. So I had to figure out how to do this. And as I'm creating these programs and training up my teams, I heard MIT was looking at doing something similar. MIT had been surveying the companies that come and hire our students. And they said, listen, here are the skills. As MIT was doing long-term strategic planning, companies said, these are the skills we want to see: communication, leadership, team building, negotiating, not just in the students we hire from you. In fact, not just in students we hire, in everyone we hire, we want to see these skills, but we can't find them. So MIT said, well, that's a good point, and we don't seem to be teaching them. Let's do something about this. We were lucky that alumni named Desh Deshpande kindly gave us a $5 million pilot grant. And MIT began to put together this program now referred to as the Career Success Accelerator. When I heard about it, I reached out. I said, hey, I've been doing this with my team. Happy to share what I've learned, some content, anything I can do to help. They said, yeah, please come help us out. So I helped create the program, and they invited me to teach. So that put me on this parallel track. I've been this startup CTO, and I've helped traditional startups and Fortune 500s play CTO or play startup. But I've had this parallel path at MIT and elsewhere, teaching these skills, and now, of course, the book and the speaking that go with it. So I'm both a tech hardcore quant nerd CTO, but also spend time teaching professional development.
Okay, well, that makes sense. But it's interesting that you developed your teams, like you took your skills as a leader, or as a leader and a manager. Either, a manager has to know how to lead, a leader has to know how to manage, as you say in the book. And we're able to parlay that into into working with MIT on this program. When about was that? Was that in the...
That was end of 2001.
Okay, so it's been a while.
And this is actually an important example because in chapter 1, career plans, I talk about how you should create a career plan and execute on it. And I talk about having 10, even 20-year career plans. Now, this was not in my career plan. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, I never would have said, I'm going to do a book and do all this. And before I started teaching at MIT, that was not part of my plan. But I just reached out to help out. Said, hey, I hear you need some help. I figured I'd give some number of hours of time, and that would be it. But it opened a door, and by offering to help, by stepping outside of where I was into another area, it opened doors, and I just follow it. And then, as I do say in my book, we have to continually revise our plans. As new opportunities come up, as things change, we adjust. Maybe we adjust our plan. Maybe we adjust how we execute. And just by being willing to offer to help, it put me on this whole new path in life.
Well, you say in the book, and as you were talking about that, it just brought it to mind, this whole idea of, when you're planning your career and you're like in the interviewing stage, I think it was, you're talking about creating opportunities. And like if the opportunity doesn't exist at that time, it doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to people. It doesn't mean that you should give up on that company. By all means, please talk to folks. Reach out, because you can in turn create an opportunity for yourself. I mean, certainly sounds like it's what you did at MIT there with the program, but then that evolved into so many other things. Your career is an interesting animal. It's an interesting beast. If you stay on the track that you're on, you might do perfectly well. And you do point that out actually in the book, that there's not a wrong answer here. But if you want to expand or change direction or kind of see what opportunities are out there, there's nothing stopping you. growing, stepping outside of your zone and finding those opportunities to create new value, lead to more value. And that's where that's where it seems to me you went with the book. So you started off with teaching or founding the program at MIT, and then 20 years later the book comes out. So what was the journey like? When did you decide you wanted to do the book?
It's interesting. I had spent time during the first year I was teaching at MIT writing a tangential book. I was writing a book on software engineering, one that I never published. And it was, here's everything you need to know about being a software engineer that they don't teach you in school. And there were some chapters on project management, a little bit on interviewing, but it's a lot more technical, a lot more mechanics of software engineering. I kept thinking, well, there's parts on networking I don't really get into, and parts on leadership, well, it doesn't really fit in the book. So I put that aside. I ultimately never published that manuscript. And I just kept teaching at MIT. And one of the great things about teaching, by the way, especially when you're teaching with other people, this isn't just me alone showing up and there's no one else. There's lots of other faculty, other people like myself who are practitioners. And it's great because I learn from them. And so I've developed in all these skills during the time I've been teaching. What ultimately led to the book, for years I was encouraging MIT to generate some content, some written content. Our class is particularly interactive. It's not even us lecturing. It is role-playing and modules that we guide.
More like corporate training, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot like corporate training. In fact, the guy who started the program used to do corporate training for a big consulting house and brought in some of those techniques with him. But it means people aren't sitting there writing notes the way you would at a lecture. So I knew our students, they were getting great value, but they weren't taking a lot of notes. I kept thinking, we should write up notes for them. I had also been pushing MIT to get the content out of our walls to other universities, because we know this isn't just for MIT students. But for various reasons, we just didn't have the time and resources to go do that. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to write up some notes. I was spending a lot of time flying around on planes, a lot of time where you're sitting on the plane, right? You've got that time to kind of kill. Let me just write up some notes. And I really thought I was writing 20 pages of notes. That was honestly my intention. But 20 pages became 40, that became 80. And once it passed 100, I thought, I think this might not be notes. This might actually be a book. And that's how it really turned into that.
It's interesting because, your story is like an actual example of how to eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time, right? And this is a little off topic, maybe a little bit, but I often talk about creativity, about curiosity, about indulging that part of yourself and following your curiosity with intent, like going down pathways of inquiry and just trying to learn, and that leads to other things. And I love that part of the podcast. It's one of the reasons I do this show, because I talk to people like you, Mark, and it's like, I'm just absorbing so much from experts that I speak to. It's my own personal development program, essentially. It's a pure self-serving thing now. I mean, maybe it isn't. I love having my audience as well, but really, I get you on. You're telling me all this great stuff that you've done and how you go about how you've gone about creating the book. And I'm picking all kinds of stuff up. But the point is, right, that you just build it little by little. Too many of us run into this and say, okay, I'm going to write a book, and boom, you burn out too quick. When, as a matter of fact, sometimes the best way to do things is just to do it little by little over time. And before you know it, you've got something there.
That's exactly right. In fact, it's interesting how you put that. So the book wasn't intended. In fact, it all began with, let me just help out this guy at MIT, turned into teaching at the class, turned into the book. And then I was having a conversation with my neighbor, and she said, oh, well, you should create an app for your book. Okay, yeah, what should the app do? So, I don't know, you should create an app. Okay, thanks. It's like saying, by the way, you should sell lots of copies. Oh, good idea. I'll put that on the checklist. But I sat there and thought about it. This wasn't on my to-do list either. But from having done lots of exploration, from having worked in education, from having worked in media, I started to think about, okay, if I build an app, what would it do? And the idea I came up with, I figured someone must have done this. I'm just going to go license that app. But turns out it didn't exist. So I created an app for my book. And in fact, I had other authors say, well, this is fantastic. I want to do this too. So we're spinning out the app in the next few months to a general version for other authors. And this is leading to this whole side business that was not necessarily intended, but it's to your point, as long as you explore, as long as you stay curious, you never know what doors can open and where they can lead. And that's why, even though you have a plan, you want to be flexible in that plan. And as long as you have a clear goal about what makes you happy, you can say, wait, well, will going through this new door make me happier than my current plan? If so, go through it.
It's like, you make these choices, but it's funny you talk about the app, because of course I downloaded the app and it's now my watch rang this morning with a tip. And I was like, wait, what happened? But it's great. It's, I just opened up the app right now as we were talking. And the first thing that popped up is, from an effort reward standpoint, it's hard to beat the introduction of two people in your network to each other. So, back to the whole idea of networking, back to, the fact that that's how we got in touch with each other. There's a lot of circles within circles here, connections within connections. Dots are connecting, as far as I'm concerned. And that's, whenever I see that happen or feel that happen, I know we're onto something here. And that's why I kind of want to go back a little bit and talk about, these creating opportunities, this connecting those dots, because the book is, you said it's a toolkit, and you can open it up any place. You can start it at any chapter. I think you said you can grab the hammer if you want a hammer, grab the wrench if you need a wrench. So in a book that's filled with hammers, wrenches, saws, sandpaper, whatever else is in here, yeah, tricorders. Well, look, let's go through this a little bit. There's 10 chapters in the book. Can we go through them a little bit? We don't have to go through in order. Like, what would you call out as, do you have favorites, first of all? Do you have like sections of the book that are your favorites, or would you recommend, where would you recommend people starting?
It depends on what you want to do. Let's do an overview so people have a sense of what are these chapters, and then I'll talk about where you might go. So there's 10 chapters in 3 sections. Section 1, careers. Chapter 1, how to create and execute on a career plan. Chapter 2, working effectively. Things like managing your manager, understanding office politics. Chapter 3, interviewing. And I really emphasize the hiring manager side. There's lots of content on how to be a candidate. Very few of us get trained on how to hire, and yet we do it. Second section, leadership and management. The essence of leadership, and then management, I look at the people side and the process side of it. And these skills, by the way, they're not just for people with certain senior titles, or not just if you're a director or a VP. Again, even if you are first day on the job out of school, you're going to be using leadership and management skills. And then the third section has fundamental skills that underpin everything. And so that is communication, networking, negotiation, and ethics. So you might say, I'm not quite sure where I'm going. Let me start with chapter 1, career planning. That's a good place to start. It can be a little intense for some. If you really don't know what you want, maybe you say, hey, I know I want to get better at negotiating. I'm going to jump there. Or maybe you say, I just want to explore. Maybe I'm going to do those last 4 chapters, build up those fundamental skills. I'm going to then come back, think about my career a little. Maybe I realize, okay, now I'm going to focus a little more on leadership or management. So it's really kind of what is near term to you is a good place for where you want to start.
To me, and obviously I went through the book because I knew I was going to talk to you. I've looked at a lot of career books in my time, and I feel like I should have looked at more, because going through your book, I was thinking there's going to be parts of this that might be for people who are more junior in their careers, or might be for people who are looking for a job. And then there's going to be parts of this that are going to really speak to me. I actually felt that it spoke to me cover to cover. Like, I felt that there was something in each chapter, in each section, that anybody at any stage in their career could really grab a hold of. And, in the beginning, you were talking about career setbacks. And we all have those. And whether it's at a company or whether you're an entrepreneur, how do you deal with those? What's the mindsets that you need? You talk about mindset. You talk about just these important, I think, overall concepts that anybody needs. So anyway, the point is that that there's something here, I think, for everybody. We already talked about the networking chapter, right? I've never seen anybody kind of put this all together in this way. How does this compare to some of the other career guides, et cetera, that are out there today?
I've certainly looked at lots of books on these different topics. Now, the first thing to note is there are plenty of books just on one topic. There are books just on how to create a career plan, books just on negotiating or on leadership. And they're fantastic. And I encourage you to read them. In fact, I reference some books I cite. I list other books that I don't reference in mine, but I've read them. I said, these are great books. Because at the end of every chapter, as you know, I have what are your next steps? What if you want to go deeper on this topic? Let me help point you in the right direction. So it's somewhat unique in that I don't just say, here's one skill. And I really boil it down from 20 years of teaching. I understand what are the real core things of this skill. What are the fundamentals and what's the best way to teach it? And that's what I try to put into this book. So that's, I think, one difference. The other is these skills do build upon each other. Good leaders know how to negotiate. Good negotiators know how to communicate. And so I'll do reference from time to time, one part into the other. I think the other things that I've seen in career books, they are, as you note, kind of targeted at almost task-oriented. How do you find your first job out of college? How do you make a career pivot? And those are useful if you're saying this is my specific challenge. Maybe you do want that particular book, but this is written, as you noted, to be these universal fundamental skills. And I don't see as much of that in career books.
Yeah, one thing I noticed or enjoyed about this is you talk about like negotiation, communication, negotiation, ethics, and networking ethics at the sort of latter half of the book, which I felt would be very like of high interest to me because like, as a leader of a team, as a manager of people, technically, I should be a leader within my organization. I am, but it's sometimes I feel like it's hard to say that out loud, but I am in the field of PR and communications. I begrudgingly have accepted recently that sometimes I have interesting things to say. So I'll take it. But there's some important reminders in here, and what really one of the things that stood out to me, I'll just go here, is when you're talking about leadership, it's a chapter. Like you can get books on leadership that are 350, 500 pages long. I'm not saying that you have the Cliff Notes version, but I am saying that you have a distilled version, a distilled kind of analysis and compilation of various leadership techniques that you have pulled out and methodologies and thoughts based on your own experience, but also based on what you've seen in the marketplace, and as you said, it's replete with references. But I got more out of like spending 15 minutes on the leadership chapter than I have with a lot of leadership books, because it's just at this stage of my career, right, where I've been through a lot of that. Reminders. So like one thing, for example, I was reminded when you craft a vision, right? As a leader, you're supposed to have a vision. A vision isn't a dream, right? A vision is something that it's a long-term, maybe long-term, but it's a goal for the future that everybody's going to work on together. And if that everybody working on it together is not part of that, then it's not a vision, is it? So thank you for reminding me of that, as somebody who's trying to figure all that stuff out in my own company. But there are major themes here that I think are really important to people.
I'm going to sidetrack a little. One of the reasons the book is written that way, it has to do with the history of why books are the way they are. Books follow a certain size for the most part. And this is because books sat on a shelf, spine out. If the book was less than about 150 pages, the spine was too small. You couldn't see it. You couldn't read the title. If it's more than 300, 400 pages, it gets to be too big and publishers don't like it. And this is why most books were in this size, somewhere around 180 to 250 pages. What that meant was a lot of books, and this has been my experience, you read the book, you go, that was interesting for about 40 pages, and then you crammed another 170 pages of repetitive stories and anecdotes and fluff just so you can fill out that spine width. And that was my sense of so many books I've read over the years. And so when I did mine, I said, I don't need 200 pages to do leadership. I'm certainly not the last word on leadership or any of these topics, but I can get you the key points in 20, 25 pages. and we don't need that extra fluff. And if you want to go further, you want to go deeper, it's going to come with some fluff, but you can do that on your own.
Sure. Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, sadly, there are a lot of folks out there who are tortured by these 500-page business books when, they could get everything they need in 75 or 80 pages. I feel I've been victimized a few times in my life. But you know what? I mean, I have tremendous respect for the amount of work and hopefully discipline. And, even if it's not all my cup of tea, the research and the kind of, the craft that goes into packing up for 300 pages, 400 pages, right? So there's a degree of as an aspiring writer, or actually a in the middle of a book writer, I completely not only admire that, but I understand that you put volume out there on the page and you're like, wow, I've done something really great. But your book is economical in the sense that there's no wasted space. I mean, the anecdotes you're telling illustrate the points. The points are right on. You give a summary at the end. You have these killer little quotes at the beginning and some call out boxes that are completely useful. It's extremely well done. But what I was also thinking as you were talking was the book is like, I think it's a good defense tool as well. Like it's a good way to prevent some of those career missteps, right? And filter out some of the bullshit that you're going to hear from people along the way that tell you, oh yeah, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Example would be something we talked about a while back, but you hear this a lot, is fake it till you make it, right? And I'm going to interview an amazing author in a couple weeks, Sabrina Horn, whose book is "Make It, Don't Fake It," and I'll talk about that from a different angle at that time. But the expression itself has been with us for so long. Your book is the antithesis to that.
So I hate that phrase. People pick phrases because it rhymes, even if it's not quite accurate. And I think this gives people the wrong expression in a subtle way. I would liken it to, we see you guys as the future of this company. Now, when you say we see you guys, the person saying it isn't trying to be sexist. They go, but wait a second, you're saying guys, you're excluding guys and gals, you young men and women. And we're sure the person saying it isn't saying, no, I don't think women can lead, but the expression has this little subtlety to it. And so fake it till you make it. No one's saying, well, completely lie and deceive. They're not implying that, but there's still this, yeah, it's okay if you don't know what you're doing. You say, sure, I could do that job for you. Oh, God, I have no idea what I'm doing. I hope I don't screw this up. And I don't think that's acceptable. And where you draw the line and how far you go, it can even be unethical. Now, it's fine to say, look, I can do 90% of this, and the part that I can't do, here's what it is, and here's how I'm going to work to overcome it. In fact, one of the jobs I invented for myself, when I spent the year at Harvard Business School, I found these professors looking for a student to do some coding. I convinced them a student wouldn't be enough. They need an experienced person like myself. I said, but listen, I want to be clear. I've never even taken an econ class. I don't know. I get what stock and bond is, but I've never really had training. They said, that's okay. We'll train you. I said, okay, great. I was upfront about what I could do, what I couldn't do. I sold what I could do really well, that it overshadowed the part I couldn't do and made it look like you could fill in the gap. So I don't like fake it till you make it, because it has that it's okay to deceive. It's not that they're actively saying, do this, lie to everyone, but it's that implication. And I just don't think that's good, especially in today's world.
Oh, and you did point out that ethically, of course, it's an issue. And it can be a huge issue ethically, especially as you get higher along in the area of responsibility and so on. And if you're the wrong kind of person, right? I mean, if you have the wrong mindset, or if you are coming from a place of not necessarily the greatest intent, let's say, fake it till you make it is like a mantra. And, you're just, it's a very selfish and very destructive, I think, way to kind of approach your career. Now, I mean, you have in the book, you have some great places where you you sort of touch on that whole milieu of like what happens when you don't know what you're doing, right? And what you just said about, first of all, being authentic and honest about what you can do and what you can't do up front is a critical piece. I mean, if you go for a job interview and they're like, here's the job, and you say, well, 7 out of those 10 bullets I can't do. Well, then it's clearly not going to be a good fit for you, and you should probably move along. And if you try to fake it, then you're going to get caught pretty soon. But in the book, the one thing that I thought was really cool was your section on imposter syndrome, and which often leads to that fake it till you make it mentality. But I loved your solution to it, right? Which is basically ask other people for to fill in the what you think you don't know.
Absolutely. This is a technique I learned from the Supreme Court justices. Not that they sat down and taught me, but I had read about it. At the Supreme Court, the tradition is when they're deliberating, the most junior justice goes first, because they're worried that the senior justice, back you think 100 plus years ago when we respected seniority, the senior justice, if he were to say something, the junior justice, oh, okay, well, I don't want to disagree with this learned man with all this experience. And so their way to combat that was to say, junior person goes first. So you can't couch the answer for what the senior person's going to say. And all the answers came out. And I thought, oh, well, that's a really good technique. I want to employ this. I'm worried about, I don't want to overshadow my employees because I don't pretend to have the best ideas. But the bonus is if I'm about to say something really dumb, because there are times I just totally miss something completely obvious. And so I've got this great idea, except it's a fundamental flaw. Like, let's build the Death Star, but, there's going to be a big hole that you can just shoot into and blow the whole thing up. Well, if someone has a better idea before me, great, I'm going to keep my mouth shut and not bother with my dumb idea. And so getting input from others helps, almost puts up those guardrails so you don't sound like you're totally not following what's going on. And you're doing it for a sincere reason, to make sure you're pulling in voices from everyone and not drowning them out with yours. So you get this great benefit by doing something noble. You get this great benefit helping you overcome imposter syndrome.
And it's not like you're out there like pretending to know something and say, well, I know the answer, but I'm going to let Jimmy answer first, right? That's not what you're suggesting. Sometimes especially when you're a new leader or a new manager and you have a new team, I can draw on my own experience when you move into a role and you have a team in place that you inherit. They clearly have the knowledge, the institutional knowledge, especially, that you do not have. And it's really important for you to prove yourself in your area of subject matter expertise. So when an issue comes up and like, if you don't know the answer, right, or the person before you did it differently or whatever the story is, I mean, if you don't have trust built with the team, if you don't have an understanding of the relationships in place, I think it's tempting to go down the route of, well, I'm just going to tell you how I want it to get done, right? Mistake. I think that's a huge mistake.
And it's important to understand those situations, who are you actually trying to prove it to? Now, you gave the example of proving it to your team. In some cases, you might feel that way, especially, I know with engineers, they're always skeptical. Are you at least as smart as I am? Do you really know this stuff? Or are you just some suit who doesn't understand technology? There are teams where they feel, no, you have to earn our respect or trust. There might be a manager where you feel you don't have that manager's full buy-in. Sometimes you do. Sometimes the manager says, oh, we're so glad we have you. We love your background. The interview went so well. We're excited. You're going to help us out so much. You come in with a certain credibility, at least to the manager, your manager. Maybe some of that translates down to the team, right? The CEO hires you and says, we're so glad you're here. And you tell the team, this new hire, she is fantastic. She's amazing. So the team gets excited. The third possibility, so you might feel you have to prove yourself to your team, maybe to your manager. I could call it manager and or peers. Third one is proving it to yourself. And that's where you say, I've never done this job before. I hope I can do it. Well, let me overcompensate and bellow at the team or force my ideas out to show I can do this, trying to show it to yourself. So it's important when you join a new team, ask yourself, where is that? I'm going to call it insecurity. And that's okay. We can all be a little insecure, but it might not be equal to all three. And ask yourself, is it to your team, to your manager and peers, or to yourself? Probably some combination of all three, but recognizing that can help you then address, well, if it's really me, if my team believes in me, my manager believes in me, if I just don't believe in myself, I just have to remind myself, stay calm. You can do this. I don't have to do that external push on others to prove myself. If I do have to prove it to one of them, okay, well, what's the right way to do it? And is it blasting ideas at them, or is it maybe with your team building those one-on-one relationships? So I say, oh, hey, I've gotten to know Mark. He's a good guy. He does seem to know what he's doing, and I trust him. So understand what that insecurity is and address that specifically, as opposed to this general, what do I have to do?
When you come into a situation like that and you're all alone, right? And you're coming into a new company, a new team, you don't know anybody. Who would you lean on in that situation? I think there's some great work in the book that kind of talks about that a little bit, but sometimes it feels like you're on an island, right? But that's a stress reaction. That's not a reality. That's not an accurate version of reality. People went out of their way to hire you. They put trust in you from the get-go. So there's got to be a friend in there somewhere you could reach out to, or a senior person or a mentor or somebody, right?
Absolutely. And at companies, successful people know no man is an island. You do need relationships. And this, getting back to our very first topic, networking, this is something more junior people miss out on. Internal networking is so important. Building relationships within the company, not because you're going to get me a job, but because we're going to work together. And knowing how to get things done is important. I'm a big fan of the TV show MASH, which is a 70s show about the Korean War. And they always have, as just like a recurring part of the show, the company clerk, Radar and then Klinger, is always figuring out how to wheel and deal to get stuff. When you think, well, this is the military. You say, hey, we need these supplies, ship it. The quartermaster will send it. That's not how it worked. And this wheeling and dealing was a big part of it, the unofficial way things work. What senior people who are successful understand is those relationships, the unofficial way things work, that unofficial org chart, those other relationships, they matter greatly. And so they're going to say, oh, you're new to the company? Welcome. Let's make sure we build a good relationship. If that means today I help you out, fantastic, because 6 months down the road, my project's going to be going sideways and you're able to help me out. I want to make sure you appreciate me and you'll want to help me out back then. So yeah, I think you're not alone. Reach out, start to build those relationships day one, and other people will be glad to have you.
It's interesting as you're talking, you said earlier that one of the things about your book is that the chapters sort of cross-reference one another. The parts can be used as a tool, like the hammer is a hammer, but sometimes you want to use the hammer and the wrench alternatively. What you're talking about there with networking, with internal networking, I think it also connects really directly to the idea of positional versus influential leadership and trust. Like building trust in the network can actually, or does, determine whether you are a leader with a positional leader only, like a leader in name, or whether you have the influence that is well earned and based in trust that's going to help you run your team.
Very true. There are the people who, I'm going to create a little bit of a stereotyped example. The person who's been at the company for 20 years, who knows where all the bodies are buried, who knows everyone, who's seen it, who's done it. And when some new initiative is announced, you look at that person and are they excited and behind it? Or are they saying, okay, yeah, new CEO just announced this. I've seen this tried 3 times. I know why it's not going to work here. And go, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't really hitch my wagon to this new project because it's not going anywhere. So that type of influential authority, that type of influential leadership, that's really important. And it comes down to those relationships, and that can be very valuable in terms of navigating what's happening inside a company.
Yeah, totally. And you were talking about like internal networking, and I couldn't agree more. Like I did one of those assessments a long time ago, StrengthsFinder. You talk about assessments early on in your book as well, and highly recommend people do a variety of them because it's not taking a test. It's just getting some insight into who you are. And I scored really high in the woo woo section, like in the not woo woo woo. It's just one woo, which is which is influence and charm and all this kind of stuff. This is a while ago before I got a little older, and I'm less charming now. But I clearly was a people person and trying to, I guess, create relationships and build relationships within my organization as the main key to my successes. So some people go forward by saying, okay, I'm going to, focus in on a particular skill, right? I'm going to be the best widget maker on this line, or whatever it is. Some people are like, I'm going to build relationships, and that's how I'm going to build social capital. And usually it's a combination of those things, but I went the social capital route earlier on, certainly in my career. And, I felt that it was like building LinkedIn. You connect with people, you kind of add them to your little internal network, but the same principle applies where you have to give as much as or more than you receive. You have to give. When you connect with people internally, they'll forget you in seconds. And they'll never know who you are again if you don't follow through on things and have the integrity to back what you want to do up. So like it brings to mind that other kind of bugaboo saying, which is like your network is your net worth. And I don't really love that very much. But it's not exactly accurate, is it? Especially in your corporate network.
No, it's not. There again, we know that's not how people intend it, but you should never feel your net worth as a person has to do with who you're connected to. Oh, you don't know people, you're worthless. They're not intentionally saying that. That's what literally means. But unfortunately, it leads to this behavior of, oh, are you important? Oh, you're important. Okay, I should get to know you because you're important. Oh, you're not so important. No, you're not worth it to me. You're a nobody. And in fact, we recognize that the relationships themselves are valuable. And you never know who is going to turn into someone who can help you, either because they become extremely successful, or they might have access to a resource you need, or they're just the right person there for you. Maybe you're just going through a crisis even, and that person where they're just there to listen to you or be supportive or pick you up from the airport, you never know what you're going to need down the road. So don't just say, well, it's only the important people who matter, which I think is what's implied by that statement. It's about having good relationships with good people, and the value just somehow comes out of that.
It does tempt you to chase influence. That comes with all kinds of problems. I mean, you did a whole chapter on ethics, right? And I think chasing influence is one of the causes for ethical failure sometimes. What are some of the bigger ethical issues that you're seeing, and especially as you work with startups, you work with a bunch of different companies, but in putting the book together and speaking with other instructors or other practitioners out there, what are some of the ethical things that people should be really paying attention to, especially now?
I think they come in one of three camps for the most part. You have what are pretty black and white issues that don't need a lot of explanation, but people still cross. I have seen far too much sexual harassment in the companies I've come across. There's no misunderstandings, gray areas. This was clearly wrong, and yet it happens. And I think companies don't do enough to stop it. That's a pretty straightforward one. I don't think I need to go into details.
I think anybody who's been in corporate life has seen this. And if you say you haven't, you're blind. I really am impressed with the lengths to which I can certainly say my current employer go to make sure that people are aware and trained, and doing everything that we can to eradicate any of that. It's not tolerated at all where I am. But I've been in places before, especially in Japan, where it's lip service at best. You see, like, just it's not a pleasant place for women. I mean, mostly women. It does happen to men, but it's mostly women. But anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But that's I get that one. So black and white issues like that is one of the areas.
The second one is One about incentive systems. So an example would be Wells Fargo, where Wells Fargo said to their employees, you need to create new accounts, right? You need to get new accounts for your customers, and we have these metrics, and this is what your bonus is based on, or you're going to be fired. And the way it was set up, it just put, I'm sure the CEO didn't say, do whatever it takes to hit these numbers, but down at the bottom, the people felt such pressure, they were creating these phantom accounts. They would take you down and you've got one account with us, but I'm just going to go and turn on 2 or 3 other accounts that you don't know about because we had a call and you can see in the call log you spoke to me. You didn't agree to this. I didn't tell you I was doing it. By add it, no one's double checking. I get my bonus because I just sold you on 2 more account types. And you just have these incentive systems that say the reward and the penalties don't align. And so they push people towards malicious behavior. And so I think we're seeing more and more of that at the product level and at the corporate level. We certainly see with social media, we see things like, oh, well, we want to get more engagement with Instagram. Well, if we make teenage girls feel bad about themselves, they're going to be online more and engage more with the app. And I don't think any one person ever said, let's make teenage girls feel bad. But the individual incentives align them towards more of those clicks, more of that engagement, even if it has a negative effect.
I don't know. I kind of want to pivot there just a second because I know I want to get to that third ethical area. But that whole idea of not knowing that teenage girls are going to feel bad when you're putting very physical based attributes and certain characteristics, like seriously overvaluing them and making those popular. Like I think that's a knowledge that we've had at least since I was a kid, for sure. Like girls have been bullying each other for ages on that kind of stuff, and there's some, you're the cybersecurity guy, you probably have a little more depth of knowledge into what's actually happening behind the scenes with the algorithms and all of those, the kind of nefarious activities that may or may not be happening to drive that kind of behavior, but it seems to me in this day and age, like if you don't think that stressing physical characteristics over holistic ones is going to end badly, it's kind of a strange denial to me.
Well, I guess one way to look at, let's go back to like 2006, before this was very common online. You could say, look at Vogue magazine and Cosmo. And of course, lots of 15-year-old girls wanted to read Vogue. And we didn't say, Vogue is evil, not back then. We have said there has been some pushback. You're creating unrealistic standards. But 2005, that wasn't part of the mainstream conversation. No one said Vogue is evil. And we thought, oh, well, now these celebrities and good-looking people are online. Oh, and now the next door neighbor who's not a celebrity has that same access and she can be a teen influencer. And isn't that great because she doesn't have to go through the system? It's more democratized. And it was each little step, right? Just turning the pot up a little more before the frog realizes it was getting boiled. So I think we had these things, and maybe that particular case you could have said, is kind of obvious before they had the report. But there is that each little step, each little turn of the dial, and the frog doesn't realize it's being boiled. So we do see that happening.
Maybe it's more of as you point out in the book, Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. I think maybe that's what it is. Or maybe I'm overreacting.
That's my number one business rule, and that's what explains a lot of what happens.
I love that, by the way. I'm going to take that with me. So what's the third area of ethics? We talked about the black and white issues. We talked about incentive systems. What was the third one?
The third one is unintentional circumstances. And we can see this in a couple ways. There's an example of, I'm now trying to remember which product it was, but think of, for example, the shoe company that says for every pair you buy, we donate a pair.
Tom's, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if this example was specifically for Tom's. It might have been for another one. It might have even been with socks or something else, but it was one of these, hey, we're going to give this away. Because, oh, okay, well, that's great. Well, but then it turns out you're putting that little shoemaker in the village out of business.
Right.
Now, you can argue, hey, greater good. one person loses a job, but hundreds have shoes. Maybe that's greater good. Someone told me an example. They were giving tampons to a village in a developing nation. That's great. We know that women have a lot of challenges. They don't have clean options, and it can cause health issues. But then what would happen is the tampons, I believe they were washing them out in the river, or maybe disposing of them in the river. Well, all of a sudden you started to change the ecosystem of the river. And so there are secondary consequences, totally unintentional. The people giving away shoes, the people giving away tampons clearly had the best of intentions.
Yeah.
Or we see a lot with AI and machine learning. So here's a very common example. There's a great book by Cathy O'Neil called Weapons of Math Destruction. So if we take, for example, giving out loans. Now, banks years ago used to discriminate based on race. So, based on your color and the zip code, yeah, you're not getting that. We said this is horrible. It's a practice called redlining because they draw a red line around an area. And there's federal rules about it. I don't believe this is happening at all in the US. I'm not saying there's not some racist in some small bank, but certainly at some national level, I don't think it's happening. But here's what is happening. We have algorithms now determining your eligibility. Should you get this loan? And the algorithm's looking at, well, what's the zip code you're in? What's the zip code you're moving to? Some other factors. Well, it turns out the zip code you're in happens to, for historical reasons, have a correlation to a certain racial demographic.
Yeah.
And the zip code you're moving to has a certain correlation. And the algorithm and a data scientist, without intentionally trying to pull in racism, had this antiquated historical racism that caused certain people live in certain areas, now gets encapsulated into the model, and it can propagate racism. They're certainly not trying to do it, but these subtle things can happen. So the third case is these unintentional, very hard to understand secondary, tertiary effects that we have to just be aware of. And they can be subtle, and it really means you have to understand the domain you're in to understand what's causing them.
And I suppose the ethical dilemma would be when you find out about this, it's what you do. It's, clearly it's done without intent. There's no malice, we hope, for any of that. If it's malice, then it's a crime, right? It's beyond ethics, then it's criminal. But if it's not malicious, and it just sort of happens, then doing something about it or not doing something about it is where the rubber hits the road.
And what if, I'm now completely making this up, well, if you say, it turns out that 0.01% of people are effectively discriminated against, but for the 99.99, we have lowered the average interest rate they get through our algorithm by 25 basis points. We're saving people tens of millions of dollars, and these are people who they really benefit. This is putting food on the table. This is opening home ownership to all these families. But these families over here, unfortunately, a certain number just get discriminated against. Is it fine to say net positive? Should we say no, discrimination's bad and we should move mountains to prevent any little piece of it? I don't have an answer to that, but it can be really subtle how you balance these two things.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good thing that I don't struggle with those issues, particularly in my role on a day-to-day basis. But it is it's something we should all be thinking about, especially as we rely more increasingly on non-human intervention and non-human kind of sources for information. You just trust these things. You trust that the algorithms are built correctly and that they filter these things into the system, that it's all accounted for ahead of time, but that's not always the case, right? So, we still need people who are looking at this from an ethical standpoint. I firmly believe that's something we just have to keep doing. And that's why it's good to have somebody like you, Mark, who's putting this in, who's kind of looking over the cyber world and looking for these things, but also essentially giving us a handbook for how to deal with this in the Career Toolkit. I wanted to talk about cufflinks and ballroom dancing, but we're going to have to put that off to another time. Real quick, how many cufflinks do you have?
Somewhere north of 400 pairs. I haven't counted lately.
Okay, that's a respectable number. I have like 8, but I stopped collecting them when I stopped wearing French cuffs. I wore French cuffs in in the 2000s when I was in sales and in recruitment and, a little bit here and there, but I love cufflinks and I do love French cuffs as well. But I don't have a call to wear them anymore. It's a shame.
Well, I don't technically have a call to wear them in that I'm a CTO. I can show up in a t-shirt and jeans. And that's how everyone in my company is dressed. Even though I would never take a job that required me to dress a certain way, I choose to dress that way. Although, interestingly, if I'm going to a recruiting event at night, I will then have to dress down.
Oh, right.
Because my team knows, okay, yeah, Mark, you're technical. We know this. But if I show up at a recruiting event and I'm wearing French cuffs, I look like some business guy with no technical skills. So I'll have to dress down on occasion.
Oh, totally. You have to package yourself properly to represent. And that's also in the book, by the way. You have to know how to craft your image. So we touched on so much of the book, but it's just in the course of a normal conversation. And I've really enjoyed this, Mark. I can't stress enough how much of a privilege it's felt to me to have you on. And I want our listeners to make sure that they go pick up the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. You can go to Amazon and get it, or you can go to thecareertoolkitbook.com. Sounds spelled just like it sounds, thecareertoolkitbook.com. You can look for Mark Herschberg on LinkedIn, and his name will be spelled properly in the episode title. I see, you're on Twitter, you're on Instagram, Facebook. Look around for the Career Toolkit book, and you will find Mark there. Mark, is there anything else that I left out that you feel like you want to leave our listeners with some words of wisdom, perhaps?
Little final words of wisdom. The best way to learn these skills is actually with other people. This isn't like learning math where you say, okay, I just have to memorize this formula, memorize a whole bunch of them. I'm going to learn history. I'm just going to read this book and memorize these dates. These skills work with other people. And the best way to learn is in conversations with others. Read my book or a different book or listen to a great podcast like this one, but discuss it with others. And it's in that discussion. That's where the rubber meets the road. We can give you a leadership concept, but you say, okay, you're supposed to talk to your boss when you have this problem. But what if the problem is with the boss's brother, who's one of your coworkers? That wasn't covered in the book.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's where you need to say, well, this is what the technique says, but I think I have to adjust it. I'm not sure how. But if you have other people, someone's going to say, I had a similar problem. And here's what I did and what worked and what didn't. So I recommend as you read my book, as you read really any business book, create this peer learning group. You can call it a mastermind. You can call it a reading group. I actually hate the term mastermind, but whatever makes you happy. And have discussions with other people. That's how you're going to get the most out of it. And in fact, on the website at the careertoolkitbook.com, on the resources page, the very first download is how to set up this program at your organization. So you can set up this type of peer learning group to upskill your entire team, your department, your company. There is no cost, completely free to download. The only cost if you choose to use a book, presumably you buy the book. If you don't want to use my book, use a different one. If you want to use content you don't have to pay for, like listening to podcast episodes, reading articles, you can do it that way. So it's completely free, and you're upskilling your whole team. You're helping yourself. You're helping others. There's a lot of great benefits from doing it. So as you work on these skills, do so in a peer learning group.
That's great advice. Go to the careertoolkitbook.com. There's so many resources on this on the site, and the app. You have the website, you have the app, the physical book itself. You have a whole ecosystem of the Career Toolkit that gives you 360-degree exposure. You can listen to stuff. It's just great. Mark, I'm so glad you were on. Thank you so much for coming. And I want you to come back again. We've got to talk about ballroom dancing. We got to talk about, half the book that we didn't touch on and whatever's coming up next for you, because I'm sure it's going to be amazing.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me on today.
You got it, Mark. Take care.